Hello and welcome back to another video today here again on Forza Horizon 5 to test out this week's brand new car pass car, the MG XPower SVR, which I will be taking around the festival shortly before we modify it and take it around again and see how it does. But yeah, probably the one I was most looking forward to out of this season of car pass. It's a mad looking thing. MG XPower SVR is just... I really like this thing. But anyway, a few things about the car. It has a 5-litre Ford V8 engine producing 385 horsepower, which was a lot back then, but to show how things have moved on, that is almost, well, the TT that we had as the first car of this season's car pass had over 400 horsepower. So it's less powerful than a TT now. But this was in 2005, so not bad figures back then. Although it was rumoured to be offered with a nitrous kit, which would take its power up to 1,000 horsepower, which would be quite scary in 2005. But anyway, it weighs 1,540 kilos, putting it at B-Class 694. It was revealed as soon as BMW sold the company, so the rumour is it was kind of developed in secret and then revealed as soon as the BMW people left. But I didn't realise the manufacturing starts in Modena, so in Italy, and then is finished off in Longbridge. It was a long, complex procedure. But anyway, we'll get into that in a little bit more detail in a minute. The original concept wasn't wild enough, so they got Peter Stevens, who worked on the exterior of the McLaren F1, to make it, well, look like this, which is why it looks quite so crazy. A lot of carbon fibre use, which made the production difficult and expensive. Many of the parts were taken from Fiats, so you might notice those headlights are off a Fiat Punto, and the rear lights are off a Fiat Coupe. So slightly odd recycled things. You wouldn't believe those are off a Punto, would you? But I suppose they're quite ordinary square lights. But the production was a long, complicated process. We had the expensive carbon fibre materials, but it had to visit 6 different companies, sorry, on its, well, build. So it was a long, complex process that involved moving it about many places. Really wasn't very efficient at all. This was actually the faster version. There was originally an SV, which came out with a smaller V8 and lower performance than this, and it launched a year or two before. But unlike that, this car was offered with a manual as well as an auto. Apparently the combined number of the two models built in total was 82, so yeah. That wasn't really the plan. It wasn't supposed to be a limited run car. They just very quickly went out of business, partially down to the expensive materials and long, complex process to build these, meaning they lost a lot of money because they didn't really sell all that well. Which is why they ended up being sold to the Chinese, which we'll get onto in tomorrow's video when we take a look at the MG3, the car, of course, built once the Chinese got hold of MG. But anyway, we should be able to hit 175 miles an hour and do 0 to 60 in 4.9 seconds, so let's go and see if it can do that. So here we are again on our road test route. That seemed to take about 7 seconds to get to 60, mostly because I was wheel spinning. Let's try it with launch control. And go. Yep, definitely seems to take at least 7 seconds. It's definitely not 4.9, put it that way. But anyway, you might have noticed I'm just filming this from game cameras. I decided for the road test part, it was simpler and kind of made more sense just to film it from the gameplay. I think some of you guys preferred gameplay and some of you preferred replay, but we'll be using replay cameras still from the festival lap, just because then I can show you the best lap rather than all of it. But yeah, for here I thought it made more sense that I can tell you my kind of thoughts on the car immediately as I'm driving it, rather than talking about it afterwards. But yeah, it's reasonably fast. I did drive a Monaro just before this because it's a similar age, similar power, similar engine sort of thing. So that kind of gave an idea of what something like this should drive like. Well, this is a lot better actually. It seems to grip more than that, which It's a bit... well, it's not really surprising. It's a lot shorter than I imagined, actually, this car. I have seen several of these in a row. I don't remember them being that short. I suppose you see them sort of from this angle. But the back kind of looks a bit shortened. I mean, I'm guessing that's correct. As for the interior, I mean, it's got some Alcantara, I think, which would have been unusual back then, I think. There's some nice dials, big MG logo on the wheel, which is cool. Some very old-fashioned style bits, and what looks like a kitchen drawer handle on the glove box, for reasons. But yeah, it had a lot of recycled parts, so a lot of this probably comes out of Fiat's, if we're being honest. Anyway, it's failed on, well, beating the 0 to 60 it's supposed to. Why is it in kilometres? It's a British car. That's slightly odd. Anyway, it's failed on its 0 to 60 that it's supposed to be able to hit. Shall we see if it can redeem itself by hitting 175 miles per hour like it's supposed to? Right, here we go, onto the motorway. Let's see if it can do this. One thing I have noticed, kind of looking at it, is I just feel like there's too many circular, tiny circles on the back, with all of the lights and the reflectors and the badge, which I know isn't circular, it's kind of 50p pence. 50p pence, yes, 50p piece sort of shape. But the lights on the back from the Fiat Coupe look too small to me, they're kind of lost on there. And weirdly, the Punto lights on the front actually look quite good. Not really the way around you'd expect. Anyway, we're up to 150 now. That's another good point about using the game footage. You can see what speed I'm actually doing, rather than me just telling you numbers that you can't necessarily see or don't necessarily believe. Anyway. So it should be able to hit 175 on the flat, basically, before we get to the downhill bit, and then it should hit more. But we seem to be pinned at 166. Yeah, on the flat, 166 is the top speed. Right, we resort to the downhill bit. Actually, having said that, we're still on an almost flat bit, and it's doing 170, so it's not too bad. But here we go on to the proper downhill. 175, 76, 77... 178 on the downhill. 170 on the flat, 178 on the downhill, so averages out at about what it's supposed to hit, but its official top speed's probably on the flat, to be honest, so it's about 5 miles an hour short of where it should be. Anyway, let's continue over towards the festival and see what it can do around the track and whether it's faster than a Monaro. So if you haven't seen one of these before, basically I take the new cars for 5 laps around the festival circuit, and what I'm showing you here is the fastest of those 5 laps. So like I said, as a reference before this, I took a Monaro round, which might sound like a bit of a random choice, but it's also from 2005, also has a V8, albeit a little bit of a bigger one, and is also a mad rear-wheel drive powerful machine like this, putting out 398 horsepower, which is a little bit more than this, but weighing a little bit more at 1600 kilos as well. It is 2 PI higher in total at 696, so it should be close, but potentially this should be a little bit slower. The Monaro set a time of 1:14.408. Now what I did notice during this lap is this really did feel like it lacked power out of the corners. I think the gear ratios were a bit off. I kind of felt like they were too long, so I was always in a gear lower than what I would be in pretty much every other car that I've taken around here. So that was a little bit weird, but despite saying that, through the corners this thing was so good to drive, so confidence-inspiring that I just kept getting faster and faster and faster every lap pretty much, leaning on the car more and more as we come round the final corner to finish up the lap and across the line. So not only did it beat the Monaro, but it also beat the Subaru STI S209, putting in a time of 1:13.807. Now, it is a few PI higher than the Subaru, so really it should have beaten it, but I think, to begin with, I thought, wow, that's quite good, it's quite a bit faster than the Monaro, but to be honest, I think the Monaro just didn't do very well, because it's slower than the Subaru that's lower PI. Mostly because it was probably faster on the straights, but it's probably more difficult to drive, so given more time, I think that might be able to set a more representative lap time for itself. I think maybe that was the problem, because this was really... I felt like I was getting closer to what this was capable of, just because I kind of felt like I could lean on the car more. It was kind of more confidence-inspiring. So I feel like I got closer to what this is capable of than I did with the Monaro, if that makes sense. But still, not a bad showing. It slots in sort of where it should in terms of PI. Just a little bit off some of the cars in A-Class. Obviously, this nearly into A-Class. But I think what we should do now is build it to the top of A, see what kind of options and customization are available, and then see how it does around the festival after that. So, as always, I'll take a quick look at engine swaps and aero type bits first, because we sometimes have some unique options. But for the final build, I'll be keeping standard engine and standard drivetrain, which I do with all of the cars to kind of keep it fair between them. So, we've got many engine swaps. We've got a 6.2 litre V8, a 5.2 litre V8, a 7.7 litre V12, a racing inline 6, a V10, a V8, and a V12. There's just too many options. Right, well, you can have pretty much any engine you want, but we're sticking with the standard one for now. You've got your usual all-wheel drive conversion, and I'm guessing some turbos. Now you've got a single turbo, double turbo, or supercharger. Right, do we have any interesting aero? I'm assuming not. No, we've got Forza aero, although that looks better than a lot of Forza splitters do, if I'm being honest, and that looks ridiculous, and that looks ridiculous. Right, that's that. Let's build it to the top of A-Class and see how it gets on. So, rather unusually for me, the thing I've mostly gone for in this is power, because it felt like it lacked kind of coming out of the corners, but it handled so well that instead of the usual kind of rallies or semi-slicks or anything like that, I've gone with sport tyres, because they were slightly lower PI than rallies. I've fully upgraded the engine, however, standard engine, but put every part on it, putting it up to 581 horsepower. It has lost a little bit of weight as well with some of those parts. But yeah, I haven't done brakes or suspension or anything like that because I feel like it needed some power. I did do a gearbox so I can tune out those slightly dodgy gear ratios, which I don't usually tune cars before this, but I feel like that's kind of necessary with this. And I will try to in future just at least do the final drive because that's the sort of easiest bit of tuning that probably makes the most difference to begin with. But anyway, let's go and see how it can do around the festival. The fastest lap time in A-Class is still the Suman-tuned Alpine. So, as with the stock vehicle, in its modified form, it got 5 laps as well, and this is the fastest lap. Now, I did initially think when I started driving this that I had ruined my lovely handling MG that was so confidence-inspiring before, but in the end it wasn't actually too bad. I thought I'd overdone the power and not really added any handling, which is true, and it was a little bit oversteer if you weren't careful, but overall it wasn't too bad, and I did get faster and faster every lap until this, which was in fact lap 4. But yeah, not too bad. I've gone for a nice green colour. Usually at this point I'd go for a livery, but there was nothing inspiring in there. Unfortunately, it does mean the nice side gill things are now silver and not carbon fibre, because that's what comes with this manufacturer colour, unless I want to try and recreate my own green. But anyway, I think it looks quite good in this green. But yeah, I've definitely made it handle not quite as well, so it'd be interesting to see how it did round here with a proper tune, because I did think after driving the stock one that modified it might be quite fast. But anyway, rounding the final corner now, and across the line. So in the end, not a bad showing from the MG. It puts in a 107.234, which is almost exactly the same time as the Audi TT RS, but slightly faster. So slots in between the Golf R and the Audi TT RS from previously, which of course were both all-wheel drive cars. So not too bad a showing from the MG, considering how I found it slightly more challenging to drive than either of those in its modified form. However, we still have none of my own built cars getting into the 106s like the Alpine, which we know is a ridiculously fast car. So it'll be interesting to see going forward if anything built to the top of A-Class does even slide into the 106s at all. So that'll be, hopefully, something will at some point. But for now, that's a first look at the MG XPower SVR. I think that's the correct way round of naming it. But yeah, still my favourite car to be added in this series from Car Pass or seasonal playlist, even more than the Wuling, surprisingly. But yeah, I just really like this car. It's just quite cool, quite rare, quite unusual. Not necessarily a pretty car, but quite a aggressive looking machine, despite having Fiat Punto headlights. But yeah, I just think it's a really cool car. So really good to see it in here. Quite a surprise to see it in here. But it is also the last car from the current car pass. So it'll be interesting to see what they announce will be added in the next update, in Festival Playlist and in Car Pass. But I will be sure to be testing them out as soon as they arrive, so I will be back next Thursday testing out whatever the Car Pass car is, and next Friday whatever the Seasonal Championship car is, assuming it's something new and not recycled. But yeah, very much recommend giving this thing a go. I do just love it. It's not necessarily the fastest thing, although with a reasonable tune I think it could be quite good. Felt really nice to drive in stock configuration as well. But yeah, there you go. That is the MG XPower SVR here on Forza Horizon 5. And I will be back tomorrow testing out the other new MG, the MG3, which is of course the Chinese M3. M3 MG. Very confusing. Anyway, I'll be testing it out same time tomorrow, so come back and check that out if you're interested in that car. But otherwise, for now, that is going to be all for this video. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll be back with the next video very soon.